talked about this before, and we're going to talk about it again. The exercises that you do don't really matter that much. What do I mean by this? Is that the other factors in your program are much more predictive of whether or not you're going to gain muscle. This is primarily for people that are training for muscle gain. Performance, strength gain, could be some parallels here, but let's leave that as a separate category. This is primarily directed towards people if your primary goal, a lot of primary going on, is to build muscle. And often the emphasis that the average person has is placed too heavily on the exercises. So quite typically, I'll get asked like, "Oh, for your arms, what do you do? What exercises do you do?" That's almost always the first question people ask, and that's the least important thing. Especially for arms, because they're a simple muscle group. You're just straightening. You're just flexing and straightening your elbow for your biceps and your triceps. Primarily, that's all you need to know. The shoulders involved some. The position you put your elbow in matters a little bit, but not really that much. It's massively overstated. And so any decent exercise for the bicep or the tricep, or for any muscle group for that matter, for the chest, for the back, for your chest, any kind of pressing movement, any kind of flying movement, they're all good. Okay. And there's slight variations, but it doesn't make that big of a difference. You could have the perfect workout, quotation marks, by doing, 7 different exercises for your chest to hit it from every different angle. But if you don't take a single set to failure, if you don't do many sets, you don't do enough volume, if you're in some wacky rep range, if your rest times are like suboptimal, whatever that means, and then if your frequency of how often you do that workout, how many days off in between is not set up in a way where you're pushing yourself to continually progress, if your tempo is weird, those things are all way more important. If you give me control, the first thing I would want is intensity. If I can control the intensity I train with, I feel like I'm good. And then honestly, I think the second thing would be rest times, and then potentially how often I can train the muscle. And then we get into things like volume, the number of sets, and then rep range, not that as important as long as I can push to failure. Those things. And then tempo, I would say, is even probably a little bit more important to me. And then you give me exercise selection. That would be the last thing. You can see, and I have some injuries and some limitations, so I think I'm a really good example of this. For triceps, the only exercise that I've been able to do for the last 3 years is the dumbbell triceps extension overhead, okay? And the horseshoes, I've made a ton of progress growing up the triceps with that one freaking exercise. Not to say that it wouldn't be better to have a couple different movements, but this is a kind of an extreme example, a bit of a science experiment to show to you that the exercise does not matter that much. What's way more important is how intense do you push that given exercise? How long do you rest in between sets? Personally, I've found longer rest times to be pretty much universally better. So I think resting like at least 2 minutes up to 5 minutes is optimal or ideal. What tempo do you use? Are you like just kind of jerking the weight around? Are you controlling it? Are you locking out at the top and then having no tension on the muscle? Or do you keep the muscle in constant, or the weight in constant motion so that you keep constant tension on the muscle? I think that's a factor that's more important because it allows you to hone in as you push towards failure. If you maintain that constant motion as the set gets more and more difficult and you come close to approaching failure, I think it's important so that you can maximize the stress and intensity specifically on that muscle. Whereas if you lock out and you let the muscle rest and then you come back and then you start bouncing out of the bottom, you're not keeping a constant groove where you just escalate further and further as the set gets harder and harder and you keep pushing and pushing and pushing, keeping all that stress specifically on the muscle. And then how many sets you do. Personally, I've found like 8 to 12 sets per muscle per workout to be ideal. And then how often do you train the muscle? Like as you get more experienced, I think training once a week is not going to do it at all. You need to hit the muscle twice, 3 times even. Those things are way, way, way more important for scaling the stimulus that you put on the muscles, for doing progressive overload, for making the training more and more intense and forcing your body to have further adaptations of muscle growth rather than the specific exercise from the one angle. And we're going to hit the biceps with 9 different angles, and that's how you're going to grow your short head versus your long head. Fucking horse shit. Okay? It's an absolute misrepresentation of what is actually important. It's not that it's a complete lie, but most of the reason, in my opinion, is that it's way easier to make content about how to hit muscles from all these different angles. It makes good content. It's simple. It makes sense to people. Okay, now I know. It's educational. Instead of just talking about, okay, you need to train harder and you need to make your training harder as you go somehow. You need to add more sets. You need to train more often. You need to change the tempo. You need to change the rep range. That's like kind of weird and complicated. And what are you saying? I'm hearing all these words. Whereas instead, okay, the inside bicep is here and the fucking long head is out here. And you got to do one from like this angle and then another one from that. Ooh, cool. Wow. So I got to train with all these different angles and that's what's going to grow my biceps. So I think that a lot of content creators have fallen victim to that tendency to want to produce something that's going to get a lot of views, which I've experienced, so I get it. But it leads to the average person having a massive misconception of what's important and what you should actually be focusing your energy on. So the takeaway would be for any given muscle group, to not worry too much about what the exercises are, but pick a couple that you like and focus on progressing them over time. Focus on getting really good form with those movements and then progressing the weight, making it more intense, adding more sets, changing your rep ranges, focusing on manipulating those variables to make your training more difficult over time, to add a more intense stress and stimulus on your body. I think that way of conceptualizing it is way more important. And if you want to change your exercises from time to time to keep it interesting, go ahead. But I think having some consistency of certain movements that you do and focusing on progressing them is more important than making your workout so complicated with all these different angles. And I've done this. I bought into this ideology, and I was learning all about the anatomy, and then I get it in a shortened position and a length position, and I was doing these workouts. Okay, so I'm speaking from experience, and it's a potentially a part of your journey in fitness is to understand the anatomy and understand how all these different angles of movements hit certain parts of the lat more than the rhomboid and whatever. But at the end of the day, it's massively overstated. It's not the key ingredient or ingredients that are the most important in your muscle building cake. So I hope that helps you when you think about your training and how you go and structure. And more than anything, I'm encouraging you to shift your energy away from all this focus on optimal execution of a lat where you're pulled this way and you lean forward and then you tuck the elbow. That doesn't matter nearly as much as how hard did you push the workout, the set, how many sets did you do, what rep range did you use, how long did you rest in between sets, how often did you come and hit that same muscle, and what was the tempo, etc. Okay, so focus your energy more on that. I think you'll get way more out of your workouts and you'll be able to see more progress.